There's a place in the far north of Middle-earth where the air itself seems to whisper warnings, where the shadows cling thicker than anywhere else, as if the very land remembers the darkness that once ruled here. Tonight, we journey there together, to the ruins of Utumno, the first and mightiest stronghold of Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world. Picture a lone elf scout, Elenion, standing at the edge of a valley swallowed by twilight, his heart heavy with the weight of centuries. The wind carries echoes of a forgotten evil, and though the fortress lies in ruins, its legacy pulses like a slow, malevolent heartbeat beneath the earth. We'd love to know where you're listening from tonight, what corner of the world you've settled into as this tale unfolds. Is it late where you are, with the moon high and the stars watching? Or perhaps the first light of dawn is just brushing the horizon? Let us know in the comments below, because stories like this are best shared in the quiet hours, when the veil between past and present feels thinnest. Elenion's mission is one of courage and quiet dread. He knows the stories how Yutumno was the seat of Morgoth's power long before Angband, how its depths once echoed with the cries of tortured spirits and the clang of monstrous forges. Now it's a graveyard of stone and shadow, but some secrets refuse to stay buried. As he takes his first step into the valley, the ground beneath him seems to hum with a memory of malice, as if the earth itself is warning him to turn back. But elves are stubborn creatures, and curiosity is a flame that even darkness cannot extinguish. So tonight, we follow him into the ruins, into the whispers of the past, and into the heart of a legend that still chills the blood of those who dare to remember. This isn't just a story of a place. It's a story of what lingers, of how the echoes of great evil never truly fade, no matter how many ages pass. It's about the courage to face those echoes, to uncover what was meant to stay hidden. And as we walk this path with Elenion, you'll feel the weight of history pressing in, the same way it presses on him. So settle in, close your eyes if you'd like, and let the tale carry you away to a time when the world was younger, darker, and far more perilous. The ruins of Utumno await. The torchlight trembles in Elenion's grip as he steps over fallen pillars, their broken edges sharp as teeth in the gloom. The air here is thick, not just with dust, but with something heavier, something that clings to the back of his throat like the taste of old iron. The whispers aren't mere echoes of the wind. They coil around him, words in no tongue he recognizes, yet their meaning prickles at his skin like a warning. His fingers brush the wall, tracing grooves worn smooth by time, or perhaps by hands that were never meant to be remembered. The inscription he finds is no ordinary carving. The letters seem to shift under his touch, their edges too precise for stone weathered by centuries. Beware the sleeper, they read, though the word for sleeper is one he's only seen in the oldest texts, a term for things that should never wake. A draft stirs, unnaturally warm, carrying the scent of charred stone and something sweetly rotten. The torch sputters. For a heartbeat, the shadows on the wall don't match his movements. They stretch too long, twist too sharply, as if something else is moving just beyond the light's reach. Elenion hesitates. Every instinct tells him to turn back, to leave this place to its long silence. But the deeper he goes, the louder the whispers grow, threading together into something almost like a voice. It doesn't speak to his ears. It presses against his thoughts, patient and hungry. The walls around him hum, not with vibration, but with a slow, rhythmic pulse, as if the fortress itself is breathing. And then, beneath his boot, the ground gives ever so slightly, not the crunch of rubble, but the yielding resistance of something buried. Something alive. The whispers twist into syllables now, forming words that crawl up Elenion's spine like spiders. They're spoken in a language older than the trees, older than the mountains, a tongue that should have died with the hands that first shaped it. The shadows around him don't just move, they coil and uncoil, as if the darkness itself is alive, breathing in time with the pulse beneath his feet. His fingers tighten around the amulet at his throat, its silver warmed by generations of his kin's touch. It thrums faintly, a silent counterpoint to the murmurs around him, as if the metal remembers the light it was forged to defy. Then the wind, not the gentle stirring of air through ruins, but a sudden, vicious gust that snuffs his torch in one cruel bite. Darkness swallows him whole. For a heartbeat, there's nothing but the sound of his own breath, too loud in the sudden silence. Then the whispers surge, louder now, closer, as if the extinguishing of the light was an invitation. Something brushes against his shoulder, not stone, not wind. The touch is deliberate. Fingertips, cold, Elenion freezes. The amulet burns against his palm, not with heat, but with a sharp, electric warning. He knows better than to turn. In the oldest tales, there are creatures that exist only in the corners of vision, things that vanish when looked upon directly. But he feels their presence like a weight, pressing in from all sides. The air thickens, tasting of damp earth and the metallic tang of old blood. And then, from the blackness ahead, a single sound cuts through the whispers, a slow, wet scrape, like something heavy being dragged across stone. It's not the wind, it's not his imagination, it's coming closer. The amulet's pulse quickens, matching the frantic rhythm of his heart. Elenion realizes with a chill that he's not the one being hunted. He's being herded. The whispers, the shadows, the touch, they are driving him forward, deeper into the ruins, toward whatever waits in the dark. And the worst part, he has no choice but to obey. The glow pierces the darkness, first two pinpricks of sickly green light, hovering just beyond where Elenion's torchlight once reached. They don't flicker like flame. They burn steady, unblinking, the way a predator's eyes might reflect moonlight just before the strike. But these aren't the eyes of any living creature. They are too still, too knowing. The air around them warps, as if the very darkness is recoiling from their presence. A voice slithers through the blackness. It doesn't echo. It clings, wrapping around Elenion's ears like smoke. Little thief of starlight, it murmurs, the words curling with amusement. What brings you crawling through the bones of the world? The voice is neither male nor female, young nor old. It's the sound of a blade dragged across stone, of wind through dead branches, a voice that has forgotten warmth. Elenion's throat tightens. He knows what stands before him, though he's only heard tales whispered in the halls of his elders. A watcher, one of the ancient spirits, bound to Utumno's ruins, left to linger long after its master's fall. Its form is little more than a suggestion, a wisp of shadow with those terrible, glowing eyes, but its presence presses against him like a physical weight. You seek passage, the watcher croons, it isn't a question, but these halls remember, they do not forgive. A sound like dry laughter rasps through the chamber. Prove you are more than another morsel for the dark. Elenion's mind races. The old stories speak of such trials spirits that demand oaths, riddles, or blood. To flee would be to admit weakness, and weakness here is fatal, but to answer blindly, just as deadly. His fingers find the amulet again, its edges biting into his palm. Then, with a slow breath, he does the one thing the watcher might not expect. He smiles. By the light of the two trees, he begins, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. By the blood of Finwë and the song of Lothian, I claim no right but this, to walk where my kin once suffered, and to remember what the darkness would have forgotten. The words are ancient, older than the ruins themselves, an elven oath, passed down through generations. For a heartbeat, silence, then the watcher's eyes narrow. The shadows around it twist, agitated, as if the very mention of those names is a spark and tinder. Clever, it hisses, but words are wind. What will you do when the wind fades? Elenion doesn't flinch. Then I will stand, he says softly, as my ancestors stood. The watcher's laughter this time is different, sharper, almost grudging. The glow of its eyes dims just slightly. Pass, then, it murmurs. But know this, child of starlight, the deeper you go, the less your light will matter. The shadows around it ripple, parting like a curtain, revealing a narrow path ahead, one that slopes downward into a blackness even the watcher's eyes seem reluctant to touch. As Elenion steps forward, the last thing he hears is the whisper at his back, so faint he might have imagined it. They are waiting for you. The path ahead narrows, the walls closing in until Elenion's shoulders nearly brush the stone on either side. The air grows denser here, thick with the scent of old parchment and something colder, ozone, like the moment before a storm. The watcher's presence fades behind him, but the weight of its warning lingers. Then, all at once, the passage opens into a chamber, so vast his torchlight can't reach the ceiling. Shadows pool in the corners, restless, as if they're alive and watching. At the center of the room, a pedestal of black obsidian rises from the floor, its surface etched with runes that seem to shift when he isn't looking directly at them. Resting atop it is a tome bound in leather that shouldn't exist. Not here, not after so many ages. The cover is pale, almost luminous, like the hide of some creature that walked under starlight long before the sun first rose. Elenion's breath catches. He knows this book, not by name, not by touch, but by the way his bones hum as he steps closer, as if his very blood recognizes what lies before him. The whispers return, but now they're not in the air, they are in his mind, threading through his thoughts like smoke. Take it, they urge, a chorus of voices both familiar and strange. Remember what was lost. His hand hovers over the cover, close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from it. The runes on the spine glow dully, responding to his proximity. This isn't just a record of the past. It's a key, a danger. Then, the tremor, a deep, grinding shudder rolls through the chamber, sending cracks spider webbing across the floor. Dust rains from the ceiling as the pedestal itself groans, tilting ever so slightly. The whispers turn to shrieks, not in his mind now, but from somewhere below, as if the tremor has woken voices buried far beneath the ruins. The ground bucks violently, and Elenion stumbles, his palm slamming against the tome to steady himself. The moment his skin meets the cover, the chamber falls silent. Even the dust hangs motionless in the air. Then, from the depths, a new sound rises, a slow, rhythmic scraping, like claws on stone. Something is climbing. Something that shouldn't be able to move. Elenion's fingers tighten around the book. To take it is to invite pursuit, to unleash whatever stirs below. But to leave it, the tome pulses in his grip, not with malice, but with longing. It wants to be remembered. It wants to be known. And as the scraping grows louder, as the walls begin to bleed shadows, he realizes the choice was never truly his. The book has chosen him. The first tendril of darkness slithers over the edge of the broken floor, just as Elenion turns to run, the tome clutched to his chest. Behind him, the chamber collapses in a roar of stone and awakened fury. The ruins are coming alive, and whatever sleeps beneath them is now very, very angry. The leather creaks as Elenion pries the tome open, its pages resisting as though sealed by more than time. The glow intensifies, not from any flame, but from the veins of silver threading each parchment light, trapped like starlight in spider silk. Before him sprawls a map, not drawn in ink, but etched by some older magic, its lines pulsing faintly as if alive. He recognizes the jagged peaks of the Iron Mountains, the serpentine fissures of the Amphiglith wastes, and there, like a wound in the parchment, the angular sprawl of Angband, its black gates rendered with terrible precision. But it's the path marked in shimmering blue that chills him, a route through forgotten tunnels, a back door into the very heart of Morgoth's second stronghold. A gust of stale air rushes past him, carrying the taste of rust and wet stone. The tome's glow flickers, and for a heartbeat, the map shifts, the lines writhing like snakes, rearranging themselves into something new. A warning, a trap. Elenion's fingers tremble as he traces the altered path, realizing with dawning horror that the tunnels don't just lead to Angband. They circle back, connecting to the ruins he stands in now. Utumno and Angband were never truly separate. They were chambers of the same nightmare. The roar that follows shakes the chamber like a beast, waking from slumber. Stone grinds against stone as the ceiling begins to fracture, dust and debris raining down. The tome slams shut on its own, its glow dying abruptly as if snuffed by an unseen hand. Elenion barely has time to tuck it into his cloak before the ground lurches beneath him. The pedestal cracks down the middle, revealing a yawning crevice, and from its depths, a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. He runs, not toward the passage he came from, but following the ghostly afterimage of the map, burned into his vision. The walls shudder around him, shedding great slabs of rock. Something gives way beneath his feet, a hidden stair, slick with age, spiraling into blackness. He takes it without thinking, the tome burning against his ribs like a shard of ice. Behind him, the ruins groan, collapsing in on themselves, but the noise is drowned out by a new sound. Wings, vast leathern wings, unfurling in the dark. The stair ends abruptly, spilling him into a cavern, so vast his gasping breaths don't echo. The air here is different, thinner, sharper, as if the very atmosphere is laced with old malice. And then he sees it, a fissure in the far wall, barely wide enough to squeeze through, but beyond it moonlight, freedom. Elenion doesn't look back, he doesn't dare. But as he wrenches himself through the crack, as the cold night air hits his face, he feels the weight of the tome against his chest grow heavier. It isn't just a map he's carrying. It's a summons, and whatever sleeps in Angband's depths has already begun to answer. The corridor shudders around Elenion as he runs, chunks of stone crashing down like teeth, snapping shut behind him. The screams aren't just in the ruins now, they are in his blood, vibrating through his bones with every frantic heartbeat. His lungs burn, but he doesn't dare slow. The map thrums against his chest, its glow seeping through his cloak like moonlight through thin clouds, casting jagged shadows ahead of him. Ahead, the tunnel forks, one path choked with rubble, the other narrowing into a jagged crevice. The map flares hotter against his skin, pulling him toward the tighter passage. He twists sideways, squeezing through just as the ceiling behind him collapses in a thunderous roar. Dust fills his mouth, bitter as ash, but the cool night air hits his face a moment later. He stumbles into the open, his knees hitting damp earth as he gulps down breaths that taste of pine and frost. But the silence doesn't last. The ground beneath him trembles, not from collapsing stone, but from something deeper, something moving. The map's glow pulses faster now, not just light but rhythm, matching the distant, resonant thud of footsteps, too heavy to be mortal. Elenion scrambles to his feet, tearing the tome free. The pages flip on their own, the map's lines writhing like serpents, rearranging to show a new path, not away from danger, but toward it. Angband's spires rise in the distance, black against the starless sky, and the glowing trail leads straight to them. A sound splits the night, not a roar, not a scream, but a laugh, low, wet, and horribly human. It comes from the woods to his left, where the trees stand too still, their branches twisted like begging hands. The map's light flickers, dimming as if afraid to be seen. Elenion knows that sound. It's the voice of something that remembers the taste of elf flesh. He runs again, this time with the map clutched open before him, its glow barely enough to reveal roots and rocks in his path. The laughter follows, weaving between the trees, always just out of sight, and beneath it, another sound, the creak of leathern wings, growing louder with every step he takes toward Angband's waiting shadow. The tome isn't just guiding him, it's leading him into the jaws of something far older than ruins, something that's been waiting for starlight to wander back into its grasp. The barren wastes stretch before Elenion like a scar across the earth, the wind howling through the bones of dead trees that claw at the sky. Each step sinks slightly into the ashen soil, leaving faint impressions that vanish almost instantly, as if the land itself is eager to erase all traces of passage. The tome presses against his ribs, its presence a constant reminder that he carries not just a map, but a beacon, one that might be drawing eyes he cannot see. Shapes flicker at the edges of his vision, shadows that move just a little too deliberately to be tricks of the light. Once, he catches the glint of something metallic in the distance, a flash of armor, or perhaps a blade, before it vanishes behind a rise of jagged rock. The servants of Angband are not all monstrous. Some wear faces nearly as fair as his own, their voices smooth as poisoned honey. He tightens his grip on the dagger at his belt, its hilt worn smooth by generations of his kin. Trust here is as fragile as the crust of ice over a bottomless bog. A sound breaks the silence, not the scuttle of some lurking creature, but the deliberate crunch of footsteps. Elenion freezes. Ahead, a hooded figure kneels beside a shallow stream, their hands submerged in the dark water. The stranger's cloak is travel-stained, but finely woven, the edge embroidered with patterns that make Elenion's breath catch. Those are the sigils of the Noldor, the same that once adorned the banners of his ancestors. But the exile was long ago, and the enemy has been known to weave pretty lies into his traps. The figure looks up, pushing back their hood to reveal eyes like chips of flint sharp, wary but not cruel. "You're a long way from the starlight, wanderer," they murmur, their voice rough with disuse. The words are neither threat nor greeting, but a test. Elenion's fingers twitch toward his dagger, but something stays his hand. The stranger's gaze keeps darting to the horizon, to the same shadows that have been dogging his steps. They are being watched too. For a heartbeat, the choice hangs between them like a blade balanced on its edge. To travel together is to share the burden of suspicion, but also the weight of vigilance. To go alone is to embrace solitude, with no one to watch his back when the whispers in the dark grow louder. The wind moans through the rocks, carrying with it the faintest echo of laughter from somewhere far behind them. The decision crystallizes in the silence. Elenion takes a step forward. The stranger's hand rises, not in warning, but in weary acknowledgement. No words are needed. The road to Angband is long, and neither of them intends to let the shadows take them without a fight. The stranger's name is Thalian, a ranger of the lost northern marches, or so he claims. His cloak bears the scars of countless journeys, its edges frayed by wind and blade, but his hands are steady as he offers Elenion a water skin. "The springs here are clean," he says, though his eyes never stop scanning the wastes behind them. The enemy's poison hasn't reached this far, yet Elenion hesitates, the weight of the tome against his chest, a silent reminder of how trust can be a weapon in these lands. But Thalian's voice carries an edge of familiarity, an accent that mirrors the old dialects of the Noldor, worn down by years but not erased. When he speaks of Angband, his words are too precise, too laden with grim detail, for someone who hasn't stood at its gates and survived. "You seek the Black Foe's secrets too," Thalian murmurs, crouching to trace a line in the ash. His fingertip leaves a shallow groove, revealing darker soil beneath. A hidden path, perhaps, or a warning. But the roads are watched now. Things stir in the ruins that haven't stirred in ages. His gaze flicks to the horizon, where the sky bleeds into the jagged silhouette of Angband's peaks. They smell the book on you. A chill knots in Elenion's throat. He hasn't mentioned the tome. Thalian's smile is thin, humorless. "You're not the first to crawl from Utumno with relics. But you might be the first to reach the end of your road alive." The choice hangs between them, taut as a bowstring. To travel alone is to embrace the certainty of pursuit, with no eyes but his own to spot the traps ahead. But trust is a gamble with stakes far higher than his life. The wind hisses through the dead grass, carrying with it a sound like distant drums, or footsteps, too many to count. Thalian rises, brushing ash from his knees. "I won't beg for your faith," he says, turning toward the path. "But if you're fool enough to walk into the wolf's den, you'd best have someone to watch your back." Elenion's fingers tighten around the tome. The ranger's words are blunt, unadorned. No pretty lies, no honeyed promises, just the raw truth of survival in a land that feeds on the unwary. And perhaps that's what decides it. He takes a step forward, then another, falling into stride beside Thalian. The ranger doesn't acknowledge him, but his shoulders relax just slightly, as if he'd been holding his breath. Ahead, the wastes stretch on, broken only by the occasional spine of black rock, jutting from the earth like the ribs of some long-dead beast. But now, for the first time since he fled Utumno, Elenion isn't alone. And that, more than anything, makes the shadows at the edge of his vision seem just a little less hungry. The earth beneath their feet no longer feels like stone or soil. It's something closer to scabbed flesh, brittle and veined with cracks that seep a slow, sulphurous mist. Every breath burns in Elenion's throat, the air itself laced with the reek of Angband's forges, where fire has burned without ceasing for ages beyond counting. The sky here is a wound, stained the color of a bruise, and the distant spires of the fortress claw at the clouds like blackened fingers. Thalian walks beside him, his face grim in the sickly light, but his steps never waver, even when the ground shudders with the distant echo of hammers striking iron deep below. It's Thalian who breaks the silence, his voice roughened by the fumes. "You've been weighing my words since we met," he says, not looking at Elenion. "Wondering if the knife at my belt is meant for your back." A humorless chuckle rasps from him. "Smart, but if I wanted you dead, you'd have joined the whispers in Utumno's ruins." Elenion's fingers brush the hidden outline of the tome beneath his cloak. "You knew about the book before I spoke of it," he counters, "and you know the paths to Angband too well for a ranger who claims to hate the Dark Lord." Thalian stops walking. For the first time, his composure cracks just a flicker of something raw beneath the weariness. "I didn't always hate him," he admits, the words quiet, as if dragged from a place long sealed. "I stood in his halls once, not as a prisoner, as a servant." The admission hangs between them, heavier than the poisoned air. The ground trembles again, deeper this time, as if the land itself recoils at the memory. Elenion's pulse hammers in his throat. Every tale of Morgoth's reign speaks of his thralls, elves twisted by torment or trickery into betraying their own kin. But Thalian's eyes hold no madness, no glee at the thought of cruelty, only a weariness that goes deeper than bone. "Why?" Elenion asks, though he isn't sure he wants the answer. Thalian exhales sharply, like a man bracing for a blow. "Because I believed him, because he promised the world would burn cleaner after the fire, and when I saw the truth," his hand flexes, as if around the hilt of an invisible blade. "I left, but the dead don't care about repentance." A shadow passes over them, not a cloud, but something vast and winged, circling high above. Thalian's gaze tracks it, his jaw tightening. "They'll have felt the book's awakening by now. The gates will be watched." He turns to Elenion, his voice low, urgent. "You need to decide if my past is a weapon you can use or a chain that'll drown us both." The wind howls through the cracks in the earth, carrying with it the distant, rhythmic clang of Angband's forges. Elenion studies Thalian, the scars on his hands, the way he stands like a man braced for a storm that never ends. Redemption is a fragile thing in a land where the rocks remember every drop of spilled blood. But the road ahead is a maze of teeth, and a guide who knows the monster's lair might be the only edge that keeps them alive. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. When he starts walking again, Thalian falls into step beside him, his shoulders easing just a fraction. The gates loom ahead, their iron spikes curving inward like the ribs of some great beast. And beyond them the dark, and whatever stirs within it, waiting to see who dares to step inside. The gates rise before them like the jaws of some long-dead beast, their iron bars crusted with rust that flakes away at the lightest touch, revealing metal beneath still black and sharp as the day it was forged. The air here hums, not with wind, but with a deeper resonance, the echo of countless hammers shaping weapons in the depths below. The tome pulses against Elenion's chest, its glow bleeding through the fabric of his cloak, casting jagged shadows across the pitted surface of the gates. Where the light touches, something shifts, not the metal itself, but the space between the bars, warping like heat haze on a summer road. A hidden seam appears, too straight to be natural, barely wide enough for a lean figure to slip through sideways. Thalian's hand shoots out, gripping Elenion's wrist before he can take a step. Wait, he breathes, his voice barely audible over the distant, rhythmic thud that shakes the ground beneath them. His other hand dips into the pouch at his belt, withdrawing a handful of crushed leaves kingsfoil, its scent sharp and green, even in this lifeless place. He crushes it between his palms, letting the fragments scatter across the threshold. The moment they touch the ground, the leaves blacken, curling inward as if burned by invisible flame. Thalian's jaw tightens. The air beyond is poison. The torches burn with more than fire. Elenion hesitates, watching the last flecks of kingsfoil turn to ash. But the tome's pull is insistent, its heat searing even through layers of wool and leather. He draws a strip of cloth from his pack, dampening it with the last of his water before tying it over his nose and mouth. Thalian mirrors the gesture, though his eyes remain wary. If the book's light fades in there, he mutters, "We're already dead." The passage narrows almost immediately, the walls pressing in like the sides of a tomb. The blue torches Thalian warned of line the corridor at intervals, their flames utterly still, untouched by any draft. They cast no warmth. If anything, the air grows colder near them, each flicker leaching the heat from Elenion's skin as he passes. The thudding grows louder, no longer just beneath their feet, but in the walls, the ceiling, as if the entire fortress is some vast, living thing drawing breath. Then the corridor ends, opening into a gallery overlooking a chasm, so deep the bottom is lost in swirling mist. Bridges of blackened stone span the void, connecting to doorways carved into the far wall, each sealed with iron bands. The thudding is deafening here, reverberating through Elenion's ribs. It isn't a heartbeat, it's machinery. Great pistons rise and fall in the abyss below, their surfaces etched with runes that glow the same sickly blue as the torches. This is no fortress, it's an engine, and it's waking up. A shadow detaches itself from the far wall, stepping onto the nearest bridge. Tall, hooded, its form blurred at the edges like smoke given shape. It doesn't walk toward them, it glides, the hem of its robes never quite touching the stone. The tome burns against Elenion's chest, its light flaring brighter as the figure raises a hand, not in threat, but in beckoning. Thalian's dagger is in his hand before Elenion can blink. "Don't answer it," he snarls, but the figure's voice, when it comes, isn't the rasp of a specter. It's smooth, almost melodic, and horribly familiar. "Little thief," it croons, the same words spoken in Utumno's ruins. "You've brought my book home." The torchlight gutters, the bridge trembles, and the figure's hood falls back, revealing a face Elenion last saw reflected in his own mirror. The chamber yawns before them, a cavern so vast the torchlight barely grazes its edges. The air here is thick, not with dust, but with something older, memory made solid, the weight of centuries pressing down like a physical force. At its center, a dais of black basalt rises from the floor, its surface smooth as glass. No throne sits upon it now, only a shadow, not the absence of light, but something that drinks the light in, a shape that seems to ripple when stared at too long. Elenion's breath catches in his throat. The tome at his chest burns suddenly, its heat searing through layers of fabric, as if warning him, or responding. The shadow stirs, stretching like a waking beast. Then it speaks, not with sound, but with a voice that unfurls inside his skull, slick and honeyed. Welcome, child of starlight. The words coil around his thoughts, soft as a lover's whisper. You've come so far, such hunger in you, such a potential. The shadow shifts, resolving into a figure tall and gaunt, its features flickering between a dozen faces. Some fair, some twisted, all familiar in a way that makes Elenion's stomach knot. It wears his father's smile, his brother's eyes. Thalian's grip on his arm tightens, but the ranger's touch feels distant, muffled, as if the shadow has wrapped them in a cocoon of silence. Don't listen, Thalian hisses, but the words are thin, brittle. The shadow laughs, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone. Look around you, it murmurs. The world above is broken. The weak cling to their scraps of light, blind to the truth, that only power endures. A hand extends, palm upturned. In it rests a gleam of something dark and liquid, a shard of obsidian that drinks the torchlight and gives back nothing. Take it, let me show you what you could be. Elenion's fingers twitch. The offer is a hook in his ribs, tugging him forward. He sees it then. Not a vision, not a lie, but a possibility. Himself, standing atop a tower of black glass, the stars blotted out by wings vast enough to swallow the sky. His people kneeling not in fear, but in awe. No more running, no more hiding, just strength, absolute and unyielding. Then, a flicker in the dark, a whisper of silver against his collarbone, the amulet, his mother's last gift, warming against his skin. Its touch is a spark in the fog, a reminder of something the shadow hasn't stolen from him yet. The memory of her voice, soft but unshakable. Power is a fire, little one. It doesn't warm just one hand. The chamber snaps back into focus. Thalian is shouting now, his dagger raised, but the shadow pays him no mind. Its gaze is fixed on Elenion, waiting. The obsidian shard pulses in its palm, a heartbeat of pure, terrible promise. Elenion closes his eyes. When he opens them, his voice doesn't waver. I've seen what your power builds, he says. I've walked in its ruins. He steps back, and the shadow's smile fractures. For a heartbeat, the chamber holds its breath. Then the shadow wails, a sound that cracks the air like thunder. The dais shudders, fissures racing across its surface. The shadow thrashes, its form unraveling into ribbons of smoke, but its voice lingers, clawing at the edges of Elenion's mind. You'll regret this, it snarls, when the wolves come for your kin, when the sky burns and the strong devour the weak. You'll remember this moment, and you'll beg for what you threw away. The ground lurches beneath them. Thalian yanks Elenion backward as the dais collapses inward, swallowing itself in a whirl of dust and darkness. The last thing Elenion sees is the obsidian shard, spinning in the void, before the blackness swallows it whole. The air shatters like glass as the shadows howl, splits the chamber. From the cracks in the floor, from the hollows of the walls, figures rise, spectral warriors clad in armor that drinks the light, their faces smooth and featureless beneath rusted helms. Their swords are shards of darkness given form, edges humming with a sound that makes Elenion's teeth ache. Thalian's dagger is already in motion, striking the first warrior across the throat, but the blade passes through as if through smoke. The creature doesn't stagger, it smiles. Elenion ducks as a sword grazes his shoulder, the cold of it seeping through his cloak like poison. He lashes out with his own blade, and this time, the steel bites not into flesh, but into something older, something that screams as the weapon finds its mark. The warrior dissolves into wisps of black mist, but 3 more take its place. Thalian fights like a man possessed, his movements sharp despite the blood trickling from a gash along his ribs. He doesn't speak, doesn't need to. The desperation in his eyes says enough. They're hurting us. A blade finds its mark. Thalian grunts as steel punches through his side, the tip emerging slick and dark. He staggers, his knees hitting the stone with a crack that echoes too loud in the hollow chamber. The spectral warrior looms over him, raising its sword for the final blow. Elenion moves without thinking. His body becomes a weapon, a blur of motion, as he drives his dagger into the warrior's back. The creature writhes, its form unraveling, but the damage is done. Thalian's breath comes in ragged gasps, his fingers clutching at the wound as blood pools between them. The remaining warriors circle, their steps synchronized, their silence more terrible than any battle cry. The choice hangs in the air, sharp as the edge of a knife. The passage ahead is clear, a sliver of darkness, leading deeper into Angband's heart, where the tome's pull grows insistent. The book thrums against Elenion's chest, whispering of secrets just out of reach. But Thalian's blood is warm on the stone, his face pale as moonlight. To press forward is to leave him to die. To stay is to risk everything. Elenion's fingers tighten around his dagger. Then he plants himself between Thalian and the advancing shadows, his voice raw but steady. "You want the book," he snarls. "Come and take it." The warriors charge as one. Elenion meets them with a fury that surprises even himself, his blade a silver streak in the gloom. He fights not with the precision of an elf, but with the wild, reckless abandon of a creature cornered. Every strike is a defiance, every parry a promise. Thalian may be wounded, but he's not dead yet, and neither is the hope that brought them this far. The last warrior falls, its form dissolving into smoke that coils around Elenion's ankles like a shackle. The chamber falls silent, save for Thalian's labored breathing. Elenion drops to his knees beside him, pressing his cloak to the wound, the ranger's fingers close around his wrist, weak but insistent. "Go," he rasps, "before more come." Elenion shakes his head, hauling Thalian's arm over his shoulders. "You don't get to die here," he mutters, "not after surviving Angband's service. Not after surviving me." The shadows watch as he drags Thalian toward the passage, the tome's glow flickering like a dying star. Ahead, the darkness yawns wide, hungry and waiting. But for the first time since he entered these cursed halls, Elenion doesn't feel the cold. The fire in his chest burns too bright for that. The tome's weight shifts in Elenion's hands, no longer just a book, but a living ember, its pages glowing with a light that hurts to look at directly. The shadows recoil as if scalded, their edges fraying into smoke, where the radiance touches them. Thalian gasps against his shoulder, his blood hot against Elenion's neck, but his fingers dig in tighter. "Do it," he rasps. Elenion doesn't hesitate. He tears the tome open with hands that should be shaking but aren't, not anymore. The pages flare like kindling catching fire, and the words rise from them, not ink but liquid gold, swirling in the air as they reshape themselves into a song his grandmother once hummed to him under the stars. The melody trembles through the chamber, shaking loose stones from the ceiling, and with it comes the light, real light, the kind that doesn't just illuminate but purges. The spectral warriors shriek as it washes over them, their forms unraveling like thread held to a flame. The fortress itself seems to wail, the walls shuddering as cracks race across them like spiderwebs. Somewhere deep below, something vast and ancient groans, a sound that vibrates up through Elenion's bones. The ground lurches beneath them, the floor tilting violently as entire sections of the corridor collapse into the abyss. Thalian staggers, his knees buckling, but Elenion hauls him upright, clutching the tome to his chest with one arm. The light hasn't faded. It pulses in time with his heartbeat, a beacon in the crumbling dark. Ahead, the passage splits, one path choked with falling debris, the other leading upward, toward a sliver of sickly gray sky. The surface, Thalian chokes out. Now, Elenion runs. The world disintegrates around them, stones crashing down like teeth, snapping shut. But the light from the tome parts the darkness ahead, searing through tendrils of shadow that lash out to stop them. The air reeks of sulfur and something worse, the stench of Angband's heart rotting from within. They reach the stairs as the ceiling behind them gives way in a roar of stone and dust. The steps crumble underfoot as they climb, each foothold turning to rubble the moment their weight leaves it. Thalian stumbles, his face gray with pain, but his grip on Elenion's arm is iron. "Don't stop," he snarls, though the words are barely audible over the thunder of collapsing stone. Then air, cold and thin and sweeter than anything Elenion has ever tasted. They burst onto a ledge overlooking the wastes, just as the ground beneath them heaves like a living thing. The tome's light gutters suddenly, its glow shrinking to a faint ember in Elenion's hands. Behind them, Angband's spires sway, then tilt, then begin their slow, terrible descent into the earth. The last thing Elenion sees before the dust swallows everything is the obsidian gates cracking apart, as if something inside is finally breaking free. The ground heaves beneath them as they stagger away from the collapsing ruins, every step a battle against the trembling earth. Angband's spires groan like dying giants, their jagged silhouettes tilting, then folding inward as the fortress swallows itself whole. Dust billows in great plumes, staining the sky the color of old bruises, and the wind carries the stench of broken stone and something deeper, something that smells like the death of ancient things. Elenion's arms ache from dragging Thalian to safety, the ranger's breath ragged but steady against his shoulder. They collapse just beyond the reach of the sinking earth, their bodies pressed to the cold ground as the world tears itself apart behind them. In Elenion's hands, the tome shudders, its pages, once alive with shimmering light, now crack and blacken at the edges, the ink fading like mist under the sun. The heat that once radiated from it cools, leaving only brittle parchment that crumbles at his touch. He watches as the last of its glow flickers and dies, the weight of its purpose lifting from his chest like a stone dropped into deep water. The book was never meant to survive. It was a key, a spark. And now that Angband's heart has been shattered, its work is done. Thalian rolls onto his back, wincing as he presses a hand to his wounded side. His face is pale, streaked with ash and sweat, but his eyes are clearer than Elenion has ever seen them. "You could have left me," he says, his voice rough but steady. "Should have, maybe." Elenion shakes his head, tossing the last fragments of the tome into the wind. "Then who would have nagged me all the way home?" A laugh scrapes out of Thalian's throat, though it's cut short by a grimace of pain. But then he does something unexpected. He reaches out, gripping Elenion's wrist with surprising strength. "Thank you," he says, the words simple but heavy with meaning. Not just for saving his life, for proving something, that light could still be found in the darkest corners, that trust wasn't always a knife waiting to twist. The last of Angband's towers vanishes into the earth with a sound like a sigh, and for a moment the wastes are eerily still. The air tastes cleaner somehow, as if a poison has been drawn from the land. Overhead, the clouds part just a sliver, and a single shaft of sunlight breaks through, painting the ashen ground in gold. Thalian squints up at it, his breath catching. He murmurs, "Haven't seen that in a while." Elenion doesn't answer. He just watches the light, feeling the warmth of it on his skin for the first time in what feels like an age. The road ahead is long, and the shadows of the past will linger. But for now, this is enough. The sun, the stillness, and the quiet certainty that some wounds at least can heal. The road forks where the wastes meet the first green tendrils of returning life, a place where the wind no longer tastes of ash, but of damp earth and the distant promise of rain. Thalian stops there, his fingers tightening briefly on Elenion's shoulder before falling away. "This is where I turn east," he says, nodding toward the jagged line of mountains barely visible through the haze. His people dwell there, or what remains of them exiles like himself, those who clawed their way back from Angband's grip, and now wander the edges of the world, too scarred to rejoin the light, but too stubborn to fade into the dark. Elenion studies the ranger's face, the new lines carved by pain, and something quieter, resolve perhaps, or the first fragile stirrings of peace. "Will they welcome you?" he asks, though he already knows the answer. Forgiveness is a currency rarely spent in these lands. Thalian's smile is thin but genuine. "Doubt it, but I owe them the truth." And a warning. His gaze flicks to the horizon, where the last of the dust from Angband's collapse still stains the sky. The Dark Lord's chains may be broken, but his servants still walk free. "Someone needs to remind my kin that vigilance isn't just for wartime. They part without ceremony, as men do when words are too heavy to carry." Thalian vanishes into the rolling hills, his cloak blending with the twilight until even his footprints seem to dissolve. Elenion watches until the land swallows him whole, then turns west, toward the forests where his own kin weave starlight into song. The journey is longer than he remembers. Without the tome's weight against his chest, his steps feel strangely light, as if the earth itself has softened beneath him. The trees here remember him, their branches bending close as he passes, whispering secrets only the eldest elves can hear. When he finally crosses the river that marks his people's territory, the sentries don't hail him with fanfare or questions. They simply step aside, their eyes bright with unspoken understanding. He expects the elders to summon him, to demand an accounting of his travels. But the days pass in quiet harmony, the rhythms of home settling over him like a well-worn cloak. It isn't until the first new moon that his mother finds him by the silver birches, her hands stained with dye from the evening's weaving. She says nothing of Utumno or Angband, of shadows or shattered fortresses. Instead, she presses a cup of steaming tea into his hands and sits beside him in companionable silence. Only when the stars wheel overhead does she finally speak. "You smell different," she murmurs, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves, like steel after the forge, hot and sharp, but cooling. Elenion lets out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. There are no artifacts to display, no grand revelations to share, just the quiet certainty of choices made and darkness faced. The land around them hums with a lightness it hasn't known in ages, as if a great hand has lifted from its throat. His mother's fingers brush his wrist, her touch feather light. "Rest now," she says, and for the first time in centuries he does. The firelight dances low in the clearing, casting long shadows across the faces of the gathered elves. Elenion sits at its heart, the scars on his hands catching the flickering glow as he lifts them to the sky, not in triumph, but as proof. The stars above mirror the same constellations that watched over Utumno's fall, over Angband's crumbling spires, and now they bear witness to this quiet reckoning. His voice, when it comes, is steady but worn, like a blade that has been tested too often. "The dark doesn't die," he begins. "It sleeps, and it dreams." Around him, the elders exchange glances, their silver-threaded hair stirring in the night breeze. The younger ones lean forward, their eyes wide with a hunger Elenion recognizes too well, the same hunger that once drove him into the wastes. He tells them of the watchers in the ruins, of the Tome's molten light, of Thalian's blood seeping into Angband's stones. But most of all, he speaks of the shadow that wore his face, that offered him power wrapped in lies as smooth as silk. "It knew my name," he murmurs. "It knew all our names, because darkness remembers what light forgets." A child barely tall enough to reach her mother's elbow tugs at his sleeve. "Did you win?" she asks, her voice small but sharp as an arrowhead. The fire pops, sending up a shower of sparks. Elenion doesn't answer right away. He studies the embers, the way they pulse and fade, pulse and fade. "Winning isn't the point," he says at last. "It's the standing, the refusing." His fingers brush the amulet at his throat, its silver dulled by smoke and sweat. "The Dark Lord's chains were made to be broken, but first you have to believe they're not your skin." The silence that follows is thick, but not heavy. It's the quiet of a breath held before a leap, of a bowstring drawn, but not yet loosed. An elder rises, her cloak pooling around her like spilled ink. She doesn't speak. Instead, she places a hand on Elenion's shoulder, her touch lighter than a leaf but warmer than the fire. The gesture needs no translation. Gratitude, recognition, a promise. One by one, the others rise too, melting into the trees until only the stars remain, their light unwavering, indifferent to the ruins beneath them. Elenion stays by the fire long after it burns down to coals, watching the ashes drift upward, toward the sky, toward the dawn already gathering at the edge of the world. Elenion stands at the edge of the forest, his fingers tracing the rough bark of an ancient oak as he gazes northward toward the shattered bones of Utumno, the sunken grave of Angband, places where darkness once coiled like a living thing. The wind stirs the leaves around him, carrying not the chill of ancient malice, but the crisp, clean scent of dew-kissed earth. It's a quiet victory, if victory is the right word. The land remembers, even if the scars have faded. A rustle in the underbrush draws his attention. A fawn steps into the clearing, its ears twitching, unafraid. It meets his eyes for a breath before bounding away, its hooves barely disturbing the fallen leaves. Elenion smiles. There was a time when no creature dared tread these woods without fear. Now life returns tentative, but relentless, yet his hand drifts to the amulet at his throat, its familiar weight a reminder. Evil doesn't die, it retreats. It waits, somewhere, in the cracks of the world or the corners of forgotten dreams. It lingers, patient as stone, but so does courage. So does the quiet resolve of those who choose to stand when the shadows stir. The elders speak of cycles of light and dark, of rising and falling, but Elenion has learned a simpler truth. The dark is never gone for good, neither is the light. The balance isn't in the ending, but in the choosing, in the hands that rebuild, the voices that remember, the hearts that refuse to harden, even when the world gives them every reason to. A child's laughter rings out from the village behind him, bright and unburdened. Elenion closes his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. This is the lesson, then. Not that evil was defeated, but that it was faced. Not that the darkness won't return, but that it doesn't have to win. The wind shifts, carrying the faintest whisper. Not a threat, not a warning, but a sigh. The tale of Utumno and Angband is over. The story of what comes next is just beginning. you.